Good evening, everybody, and welcome. Really excited to be here. Happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there in the crowd. Really excited for this one. This is just going to be a really terrific night. We're going to start talking about some of the really impressive segments. Looking ahead, even the segment that's behind me here is the segment just past Kokomo Pass, and we've just got a lot of great stuff to talk about. We've got here actually a couple of different comments coming in from Mad Hippies kind of talking about this is the graduation day on the CT, and that really is true, that when you hit that segment 6, particularly Georgia Pass is kind of the entry point into the start of the most beautiful sections of the Colorado Trail. And so you've kind of made it through the tougher grind that is the first 100 miles or so, or maybe 80 miles, give or take, to get there to Georgia Pass. So we're heading into a really special segment, or block of segments rather, that are really terrific. And so we've just got a ton to talk about. I want to start though first, we're going to talk a little bit about some news that came out this week about an Ursack ban. An Ursack ban is probably a little bit too strong, but effectively what came down from a number of different forest districts in Colorado was a ban on tying the Ursacks to the tree. So if you use an Ursack, you have to now hang it. So basically do the classic bear hang anyway, where you throw a rope over a tall branch and hang it. And this is a really interesting one. I know it can be really frustrating for a lot of folks because the whole ideal picture of a Ursack is to be able to hang it really conveniently from the tree. And I just want to relay a little bit of what I was told about this a few years ago. And you can go back and watch. I had a video a while back about food storage on the CT, and I'd encourage you to check it out because I dive into a little more depth on that one about this issue. But I was hiking the John Muir Trail, and I talked with a park ranger, and she was a park ranger somewhere, I believe Grand Canyon, for a season, and then she was married to a man who was he was a park ranger in Sequoia, and his job was quite literally to go to the bottom of this cliff where a bear had learned to roll bear canisters off the cliff and shatter them and then go track down the food. And his job was basically to go collect all these broken bear canisters. Now, that's not really a concern here on the Colorado Trail, but basically what she said was, Ursacks, the problem with Ursacks is, and again, this is just what I was told, so do with it what you will, but what she told me was that basically if a bear comes into your camp and bites an Ursack, even if they don't get the food, they still get the taste of food. So it still is basically acclimating or getting them accustomed to getting food from people, or at least that sort of reward is there. And that's basically the impetus driving this. There's a lot more that goes into it. There's a pretty extensive lawsuit going in California, and it's really, really difficult. But the good news here is that actually, I think the bear canister is a great move. And if you watch that video that I put up ages ago, I still recommend hanging your bear bag if it's an Ursack. And I've seen actually just last season at the bottom of Hope Pass, I saw a group of hikers who had their Ursack completely shredded. So I'd encourage you to Google Ursack bear shredded, and you'll find plenty of those pictures too. So it is, to Ruth's point here, it is pretty unclear. It's sort of vaguely, the language isn't very buttoned up, and I believe it's probably to avoid any of this sort of litigation issue that's happening in California, not to basically get themselves drawn into the mud on it. But just know that if you do end up carrying a bear canister, it's not the end of the world. I think there's actually a real argument to be made for carrying one, specifically when you get into monsoon season. You can put your electronics in the bear canister. There are a lot of uses for it. One of the other things, if you do end up carrying a bear canister, if you just sit with the bear canister, a lot of people will sit on it, but if you put it sideways and sort of block it with a log or a tree, it's really nice lumbar support. So as a person with a bad back, I can tell you that it comes in pretty handy. It's pretty nice as well. So don't be discouraged by that one. But here we are seeing that there are some reports of Ursacks being destroyed. So just know that they're not as foolproof as you would like. And really, the whole goal of food protection is actually to protect the bears, not our food necessarily, because once the bears start becoming really familiar with food, you end up then having bears getting put down, and nobody wants that, right? So here we've got lots of different folks here talking about basically their experiences. Pay attention as well to Unlikely Hiker there in the Adirondacks. That's an area where bears are certainly prevalent, and that they are making a lot of they are making a lot of sort of moves there and learning quite a bit about how to get into bear canisters. So who knows what will happen in the years to come, but just be ready for this year and make sure that you are taking care of the bears and the wildlife and your food. I've seen some crazy stuff out in the woods. I've seen actually in the Sierra where you do the John Muir Trail, the reason you're not allowed to do the hanging system is that bears 30 years ago figured out how to cut them down. And now bears that weren't even alive when counterbalanced hanging was the practice already know how to do it. So they pass this sort of down, some magic, genetic, something or other memory. It's really pretty remarkable. They're incredible creatures, which is all the more reason that we want to take care of them. So let's dive right in here. We're basically breaking right in. Let's talk here. All right, so we're diving into segment 6, and segment 6 has the unique distinction of being the longest segment of the Colorado Trail. It clocks in at 32.7 miles. There's 5,200 feet of elevation gain, 6,000 feet of elevation descent. This is also the section of the trail where the Continental Divide Trail joins up with this, or rather it's before the CDT breaks off from the Colorado Trail, just past Georgia Pass. So it's a really great segment. It's, if you look at the numbers there, 5,200 feet of elevation gain it's not that much over the course of 32 miles. It's still relatively straightforward. It's one of my favorite climbs getting up there to Georgia Pass, so it's not something to be super concerned about. There is a climb that we're going to talk about that is pretty aggressive, but for the most part, this is just an incredible segment. You head out of Kenosha Pass, you cross the highway, you have a little bit of a climb, and then you descend down to a creek. And then you begin this sort of steady climb all the way to the top of Georgia Pass, which is the first time you get above tree line. So at about mile 83, you hit Georgia Pass, and it's absolutely incredible. I'll show you here a little bit of a video of Georgia Pass, and just to give you a sense of what we're looking at here. This is right at the top of Georgia Pass. So as you approach, and kind of pay attention there to how smooth the trail is. Just a really nice climb up there to Georgia Pass, again, right above tree line. So let's start breaking down some of the original tips that I put in that first video. I want to share some of those with you because I still stand by each of them. There's no real update for them. So I think they're just terrific. And here to Ruth's point, the climb to Georgia Pass, if you're heading toward Durango, really nicely graded. I couldn't have said it better myself there, Ruth. So certainly agree with you on that one. So the original tips that I shared was that if you have, when you get to the end of segment 5, the start of segment 6, if you have cell service, particularly before you get to the actual Kenosha Pass, but at that rise where you're at the very end of the climb in Kenosha Pass about to descend, they'll often have cell phone service. So I recommended that you can go ahead and book a room for Breckenridge at Kenosha if you have cell service, or if you hitch into Fairplay or one of the other towns where you have service, that's a great opportunity to go ahead and book a room for 2 nights out because you're looking at 32 miles from there, which is pretty doable in a matter of 2 days. You also want to practice timing Georgia Pass. And what I mean by timing that is really make sure that you get in the habit of figuring out where you're going to be above tree line the next day and plan your campsite and your starting time accordingly. So make sure that you are getting over those really high points early in the day, or at least before noon or so, and planning to stop far enough into the segment that you're able to do that. I think that's a really important one as well. And then also watch sun exposure, especially the second half of this hike. You get into some conifer forest. There's another burn zone. There was another forest fire, and that forest fire unfortunately happens at this really difficult part of the climb. It's that steep climb that I was mentioning. So you really want to be cognizant of sun exposure as you go through this segment. Even though you're back in the woods for the most part throughout this segment, you still really want to be careful for that one. Pay attention here to Mad Hippies. They hike the trail and really are familiar with it. And so here they said, we said it before, we'll say it again. Segment 6 is the first decent challenge. Mileage plus alpine and being on your own, but not to worry. Breck is coming and you can change things up as needed. And I want to zoom in there specifically on the idea that Breckenridge is a great opportunity for you to be looking ahead at mile 104. You're going to get to the Gold Hill trailhead, and that is the time where you can absolutely regroup. And whatever is not working for you, you can shift up. whatever is working, you can start reinforcing that. So if you're finding that a certain piece of gear is working great, outstanding. If you're finding a certain piece of gear is not working great, there is an REI there in Dillon, and so you will be able to get there and spend a day kind of getting some things fixed up. For example, I had a sleeping pad that popped a leak, and I was able to get in there and replace it in Dillon, or buy a pillow, for example. I decided I needed that, but I was also able to send back stuff that wasn't working. So I had a solar charger, for example, that didn't really work the way that I needed it to. So basically, Breckenridge is a great chance to start sending stuff back. And Breckenridge, I'll say Breckenridge, but I really mean Breckenridge Frisco kind of together as well. So here, let's talk first about the new tips. We're going to kind of dive into some new ones. Actually, before we get into the new tips, let's go ahead and do this video. I want to show you a little bit of what segment 6 looks like. And I tried to keep these in chronological, or not chronological, what would you say, sort of the order you'll see them, but they're clips from different years. So there may be a couple that are kind of out of order, but I tried to keep them that way. But this is to just give you a little taste of what to expect in segment 6. So take a peek at this one here. So here you start off in this sort of wooded area. You'll notice there's a little bit of a climb. Again, this is the clip that I just showed you a minute or two ago. It's one of my favorites because it really kind of captures what I think of when I think of segment 6, is that climb up to Georgia Pass. You see here, it is up high above elevation. Tree line's 11.7 out there in Colorado. So here, kind of get a good sense of it. And then you descend back down. And this is one of my favorite parts of the whole segment, is the descent down off of Georgia Pass. But there's lots of spaces to sit there. That's us at Georgia Pass. This was a couple of years prior. And then you head down into the wooded area toward Breckenridge at the very end, and kind of hit those trees again. And depending on the time of the day, there can be plenty of shade, but there's a lot of sun exposure because the beetle kill, as you see there, kind of set in. And so there's a lot of trees, but not a lot of cover, ironically. So just be really aware of that as you go through that. So let's dive into some of these tips that I have for you, the updated tips after making another pass on the Colorado Trail. And so my first one here is that there's very little camping past Swan River. So Swan River, you'll see it in your data book. I'll have to have somebody grab me the mileage of the exact Swan River stop there. And, Swan River is there's a bridge there. There is some good camping there. It's before, if you've seen the kennels, the dog kennels, there are the dog kennels there for I don't know if it's like a wolf rescue or something, or maybe they train sled dogs or pack dogs. I'm not quite sure, but you will know the dogs are hard to miss. But the Swan River is really the last good camping in the segment. So you can, from Swan River, that's when you start that really gnarly climb. So at Swan River, you'll see the sled dogs, as Girl Plus Dog Adventures points out. You'll see the sled dogs off to the left at mile 16.6. Adam, you're a lifesaver right there. And then you're going to begin this big climb up to the top of the segment. And that's also where the forest fire was. So that's a really important one to know, that there is good camping at Swan River. Past it, it's really sparse. You're likely to end up in a spot where it's not even. It's definitely going to be dry camping. There's no real water sources beyond that for a long time. And so you're basically, you just need to know what you're getting into. So if you decide to keep pushing forward, that's okay. I've done that a number of times. Carry water, make sure you're ready for that for the next 16 miles or so to finish up the segment. If you decide to stay there, know that that's a really great spot, because the next day you're likely to make it into Breckenridge, but it's also a really good place to kind of keep in mind timing. So if you're looking for a hotel, especially if you get out there, say the 4th of July or near another weekend, those are all times to know for your planning. So just be really aware that there's not great camping past that. There may be some spots where you find one or two, but you're going to have to dry camp. So just be really aware of that. Now, I mentioned this a couple of different times here, but my second tip is be really careful for the sun and heat if you start that climb from Swan River in the afternoon, because the sun just will pummel you from there. So I've done that climb in the heat a number of times. It's not super great, but it's also pretty short relative to a number of the other segments. So it is something that is really doable. So just know here that in this segment, you want to carry lots of water. It's a great time for your sun umbrella, or even better, it's a great opportunity to stop at Swan River, spend a couple of hours, let the sun kind of go down a little bit, and then make the climb when the sun isn't straight overhead. And that will keep you a lot safer going up, because, I've seen folks who had to come off the trail for sun exhaustion or heat exhaustion. So it's a really important one to just know and be aware of. And then finally, this one kind of goes back to what we talked about initially. The closer you get to Breckenridge, the more bear aware you need to be. There were a number of folks who reported interactions with bears or bears coming into camp closer to Breckenridge, say mile 99 past. That's where I've seen a lot of people reporting that they've had bears try to get their food bag or actually get their food bag. And it makes a lot of sense that where there are a lot of houses in that area and a lot of day hikers, that sort of thing, the bears are going to show up. So just be more aware of it. My general feeling is that for most people, if you are able to make it close to Breckenridge, most people are going to push on and get into Breckenridge because there's not a lot of climbing after that. There are a couple of small climbs as you get toward the end of Breckenridge, but for the most part, most folks are going to opt to not camp there. You're either going to go on into Breckenridge or you're going to stop earlier, generally speaking. That's not a hard and fast rule, but overall, think of segment 6 as being your sort of rite of passage. I can't say this enough. I really agree with Mad Hippie's life here that segment 6 is sort of, that's your admission. That's when you know that you have paid in footsteps for the views that are going to come from then on. So that's not saying anything negative about those first segments, but remember, your packs are going to be as heavy as they're going to be. Your body is not as broken in and ready to hike as possible. And there's a lot more lower elevation, below tree line, sunny, exposed. A lot of those different segments have some challenges. And the views don't necessarily balance out the challenges until segment 6. And that's what we're going to start to see here. Some of those really incredible views where the work is still present, but the views really increase at this point. So get really excited about it. That is segment 6. I think you're going to love it. I know that I do. Let me know if you have any questions about that, and I'll be happy to field those as well. Take a sip here. This is one of my favorite things. This is my mean mug. And if you ever have a Zoom call and you make yourself a mean mug, what you do is you just wait for everybody to be talking about something, take a little sip and match the face. And I promise you, it's my favorite thing to do in a big mood, in a big meeting, and watch. Somebody's going to catch you making that face as well. And then here, also, before we move on to segment 7, Elderberry here points out that there are crazy mountain bikers close to Breckenridge. Absolutely, you need to be careful of that. There's actually a really popular mountain biking trail there in Breckenridge called Blair Witch, the Blair Witch Trail. And it's nicknamed that because it'll scare the hell out of you, which I think is really funny. But it's a really popular destination for mountain bikers. And, you know, it's always nice when you hit the wilderness areas where the mountain bikers can't go, because they can fly around corners and can be pretty scary from there. So just be cautious of that. Anytime you're getting into an area where you start seeing mountain bikers, I've seen them come flying through segment 7, particularly segment 6. There are a couple of, maybe not segment 7, I'm sorry, segment 6. I've seen them a lot in different areas, and it's been scary when they come through. All right, segment 7. This one is just something else. This one, I just don't even know how to describe segment 7 to you, because it is incredible. It is difficult. It is frustrating. It is everything you can imagine. I would think of this maybe something akin to like having a really cool vintage sports car that when it's great, it's amazing. When it's not, it's really tough, right? And so here we've got 13.2 miles. It's 3,700 feet up and 3,100 feet down. And that's if you're going from the Gold Hill Trailhead in Breckenridge toward Copper Mountain. Of course, you'd switch those numbers if you were going the other way. What you need to know about this segment is that it's just one climb and one descent. And the climb from Gold Hill is pretty steady for the most part. There's a little dip, but for the most part, it's straight up. And then it's going to walk along the 10-mile range, and then it's going to fall right back down into that section over there by Copper Mountain. And so it's at the top of that ridge line. It's absolutely stunning. It's just one of the most beautiful sections. Let's actually take a look over at that, and I'll show you here what we're talking about in segment 7. You're going to see a lot of that 10-mile range. And what I want you to pay attention to here is the exposure. And what I can tell you is that every single time I've been over this segment later in the day or even in the afternoon, I've had to wait out a storm, or I've got caught in a storm at the very top. That's sort of like, that's where I met Elderberry as well. And we both had to race off of the mountain to avoid a storm. So it's worth knowing that there's a lot of exposure there. I met some CDT hikers while I was waiting out a storm once, and they said as they crossed, their hair was standing on end from the electrical charge. So they were very much in danger at that point. So certainly be aware of that. It's not something to be afraid of, especially because you'll have plenty of opportunity to see the storms coming. So you'll have plenty of opportunity to grab cover. So don't be afraid of it. Just know that it is an area that you are particularly exposed, and because of the geography, the storms tend to collect over that ridge line. So let's take a peek here at segment 7 and kind of get a feel for what we're getting into in this segment here. So here you'll notice that there's a lot more exposure early in this segment. There is a little bit of a burn zone. Very much the sun will come straight down. And then you get, this is one of my favorite spots here. That little section of trail is right before you hop up on the 10-mile range. And you'll know when you're about to leave tree line. This section here, pay specific attention to it. If the storms are pushing in, this is the spot where I'd recommend turning around and grabbing cover, because you're about to end up right up here, which is spectacular. As you can see, it's really fun hiking, really beautiful. You can see Breckenridge down there in the left-hand corner. And then here you can see Breckenridge off to the left. You can see Wayne, and you walk this razor's edge. And I just can't tell you how cool it is. It's just so neat to be up there, especially if the storms aren't pushing in. And then you see Copper Mountain there. Now, what you need to know here is that after this, you really start diving down, and the descent is rapid. It's really, really steep. You can kind of see it here, but it's kind of hard to make out in the camera, but it's absolutely just a knee breaker by way of the steepness. It's really tough. And so just make sure that if you do decide to slack pack it, we're going to address this in a second, this idea of slack packing, because it's one of my new tips, spoiler alert. But here, you will definitely start seeing some folks who try to go the other direction through here, and it can be real tough. And I did that last year, and it was very, very hard. So let's go ahead and go over the tips that I had the last time I made a tip video for this segment. I talked about shooting for Leadville in 2 days. And what I mentioned here is that, it's 39 miles from Breckenridge to Leadville. So if you pare down your pack, if you know you're only going out for 2 days, you can really reduce the food you're carrying. There's lots and lots of water in this segment. And so you'll be able, and the following segment, so you'll be able to really zip through pretty quickly. And so consider going to Leadville in 2 days. And if you do that, it's a great opportunity when you're in Breckenridge to go ahead and set up a space in a hostel or a shuttle. Camp just before tree line. That's a really great idea, because there's some great camping just before tree line near water, in fact. And so you can jump right over that and kind of make your way down into Copper Mountain for breakfast, which is a really good way to do that. And then this is a really great time to start learning your elevation charts. So pay attention to how they work, or how your elevation gain happens, and what you consider difficult. I've mentioned before, I consider anything over 300 feet of gain in a mile to be challenging, and anything beyond that to be moving into very challenging territory. So figure out what that number is for you. And this is a great segment for it, because it is very much, for the most part, straight up and straight down. And so you can kind of figure out a gauge for yourself here. And that's a good opportunity to kind of sort some of those numbers out and pay attention to that as you go. So let's talk about some of these newer tips. And we've had a couple of folks here who've already kind of mentioned this one. And let's talk about first, actually, starting early or camp early. So I've mentioned here the storms kind of roll in, and that one is just the storms rolling in are really important to keep an eye out for here, because I've seen people who've gotten so shaken up by the storms here that they've discontinued their hike. I had a couple of folks I hiked with a couple of years ago who quit hiking after getting caught in a storm up there, and they were pretty scared. I mean, it was scary to be up there. So starting early will help you, because you'll avoid a lot of that sun exposure. And then planning to camp early, if you don't start early, is a great plan too. So stay below tree line, camp out. And that's also really cool, because when you get to the top, you'll often in the morning there see a bunch of people who are hang gliding off of that ridge line down into the Copper Mountain Valley, which is really cool to see. So if you start hiking in the morning and see hang gliders over that valley, that's pretty neat. So it's just worth knowing that you can either start really early, meaning 8 o'clock or earlier, or camp early, meaning maybe 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon if you start at, say, 10 o'clock in the morning. But know that it's very hot in that segment until you get to that tree line section because of the burn. So let's talk here. We've got another one coming up. We've had both Mad Hippies and Reclaiming Ruth have alluded to this already, and it's the idea that you can slack pack the section. Slack packing, for those of you who don't know, is basically when you leave your backpack somewhere, hotel, hostel, your car, with your parents, with your shuttle, whatever, and then you hike the section with just food and snacks. So you plan to stay off trail that day. It's kind of like day hiking, but the difference is you're doing it on a longer hike. So slack packing is not cheating. I don't think that's a big deal. I did this a couple of times in the past, and it's really a nice way to go because of that climb. Also because of the risk with storms and exposure. So getting up over that section as quickly as possible makes a lot of sense to me. Basically what you do is you take the summit stage shuttle and you take it to the Gold Hill trailhead, and then you hike the section and get to Copper, and you hop back on the free summit stage shuttle and take it back over to Frisco, and then catch the bus back to Gold Hill. Unless you're staying in Frisco, then you just stay in Frisco. But it's a really nice way to go. So what you would basically need to do is rent a hotel room or a hostel bed for 2 nights, and then do that section and leave your bag and just carry your necessities from there. I love this plan. I think it's a really nice way to do a tougher segment because it is one of the harder segments. When you're at this point, if you're trying to figure out what I mean by difficulty, I would liken this to segment 4, especially the start of segment 4. It's very similar to me in terms of that climb as well. Now, when you get to the end of the segment there, the segment is actually kind of at Copper. It's a weird one because you'll come to a highway, but the segment doesn't really end there. It ends kind of 2 miles in, kind of randomly at Copper. So that's why this tip kind of is included here. If you get to Copper later in the day, you're not allowed to camp within 3 miles of Copper. So just hang out there for a little while, have a beer, hang out, just kind of wait for the sun to go down a little bit, then hike in until it's legal to camp. There's a lot of camping by a lot of creeks and crossings there. So spend a little time at Copper, take a break, charge up your cell phones if you need to, get some food. They've got a couple of places where you can get some food. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But basically, I think that hanging out at Copper is a really great plan. There is good flat camping, and it is legal. At the very bottom of the segment before you get to the highway, there's a river that kind of passes by the highway, runs parallel, and there are a couple of camp spots there that are legal to camp there. They're in the data book. That's how we know that they're legal. And as Mad Hippies point out too, if you are hiking with a dog, the summit stage is dog friendly. As long as your dog is leashed and well behaved, you are good to go there, which is a really nice way to give your pup a break and make sure that they are not they're not having a tough time. And your dogs will get tired. They will get really tuckered out there. So that's segment 7. It's fantastic. I love it, but I also find it really frustrating at different points and really difficult depending on where you are in the day. It's also worth knowing that if you're one of the early morning hikers or the early season, not morning hikers, there is a really difficult sort of precipice that you'll have to cross, which will likely be covered in snow. And it's really, it can be kind of sketchy. So pay attention, actually watch Girl Plus Dog Adventures video on this hike on segment 7, and you'll see them trying to cross a snowbank in a much less snowy year. And it was pretty sketchy. So just be aware of that. All in all though, that top of the 10-mile range is so very worth it that by the time you get there, I think you're going to love it. That's segment 8, everybody. All right, segment 9. This one is, well, oh, I said segment 8, didn't I? Goodness gracious, sorry everybody. Let's start this one back over again because I skipped a whole segment and it's one of my favorite segments. So forgive me. That's better. Spoiler alert, we're going to talk about segment 9 next. I bet you probably couldn't have guessed that. So we're going to talk now about segment 8. This one is just one of my absolute favorite segments of the entire trail. It's one of the longer segments. It's 25.4 miles, 4,400 feet of elevation gain, 3,800 feet of elevation descent. You're going to start this one at Copper Mountain Resort, and you're going to finish up at Tennessee Pass Trailhead. And you're going to cross that section where you'll go up past Janet's cabin, which is this cabin you're going to see off kind of to the left as you climb up towards Searle Pass. You will see Searle Pass and stay in a bowl from there and hike above treeline until you hook to the right, hit Kokomo Pass, and then you're going to get to this place just behind me. And there's a pretty steep descent down into the valley there by Camp Hale. A lot of great camping, just a really special segment of the trail here. I'll point out here, math is certainly not my strong suit, and it's so much not my strong suit that even counting qualifies as math for me. And I will thank you, unlikely hiker, to not laugh at that. I'm very sensitive about my math skills. Obviously not, I'm just teasing. But this is just a great segment here. There's so much to see in this segment, and it's one of the first times you get up into one of those high alpine bowls. So let's take a look at what we're getting into here in segment 8. This one, I did a video, sort of a short video ages ago, so I had to add some of the climbing and some of the forested sections because full disclosure, from Searle Pass to Kokomo Pass is one of my favorite parts of the entire trail. So I had so much of that section that I omitted any of the actual forest section. So let's take a peek here at segment 8, kind of get a taste of it here. So here what you're going to see is you start in this forested section, you start climbing up this sort of area here. I believe All right, everybody. Sorry about that. I had mentioned there that my internet's been cutting out a little bit, so we're going to keep rolling with the punches. You'll know this is probably getting to be tradition. This is the 3rd week in a row that we've had that happen, so forgive me here. So let's go ahead and take a peek and kind of get a taste here of segment 8, kind of get what we have. Y'all, I'm sorry. I don't know what's going on here. Let's regroup. Let's stay calm. We're going to get through this. So let's take a peek here at segment 8. We're going to take a peek and kind of get a taste of what we're looking at here. Thanks for your patience, everybody. So you start climbing here out of Copper Mountain Resort. You're going to climb through this sort of conifer forest. This is running along the Jacques Creek. You're going to find lots of water in this section, which is good to know. So you're really not going to need to carry a ton. You can see Searle Pass is up there in the distance, up in the sort of notch there. And then you're going to get up into this bowl, and you're going to find just so many of these. You're going to find so many of these, like, just beautiful trails with nice track, nice tread, not a lot to trip on. Just really fun, really fast hiking. So you're going to make a lot of mileage there. And you kind of look down there, and that's Kokomo Pass is in the little V there. You see Wayne and I are hanging out, having a snack. And this is just before Kokomo Pass is down at the bottom of that little rise. And so you kind of make your way across this ridge, and then you're going to start dipping down from Kokomo Pass. You'll see this sign. You're going to dip down low. I sound like I'm a dip down low and roll to the ground. So then you head into this forested area. It's really steep at first, but then it settles down quite a bit. And then when you get to the end, you're going to hit this very flat valley by Camp Hale. And there's going to be a little bit of climbing. You're going to hit this train track. And then basically you're going to get to the highway there. So you cross the highway once and kind of loop back around. Most of the climbing is right there in the front towards Searle Pass, but it's all very, very nicely graded throughout the segment. And then you get up into the bowl. There's a section there called Elk Ridge. And so a lot of people report something like this, where if you get up there later in the day, you will end up really having to hustle. I had to just absolutely race through it last year. which is a bummer because it is so very nice whenever it's not in a hurry, which kind of reinforces that idea that it's a good idea often to try to time that ascent if you are able, which is why I keep preaching this idea of time. Give yourself lots of time for this hike, because if you can give yourself time, you can stop and enjoy these segments and wait for a time when it's safe to enjoy those segments as well. So the tips that I gave everybody here in the original video series, just to give you a recap, I talked about not being fooled by the elevation. And so what that meant was sort of twofold. One is that you're going to be up at elevation, but don't let that bother you or worry you. But also pay attention, because it can be deceptive where you get up there and you have to stay above that elevation for a long time. So the exposure is there where there's not a quick egress. There's not a quick way to dip down if you're up there when a storm rolls in. So just be really careful with that elevation from there. I also mentioned that it's a good idea to pack in your dinner from Copper Mountain. So go ahead and grab some food. As long as it doesn't have something that can spoil, you can carry it with you and have leftovers for dinner, which is a nice way to go so you don't have to fire up your camp stove. And camp just before or after treeline is a great way to go. So if you're there early enough, go ahead and cross over that Sorrel Kokomo Pass by Elk Ridge and then head down into the valley behind me. There's lots of good camping. But if not, stay before treeline. There are a lot of great spots through there. Wait for the night and then ride it out in the morning. It would be just incredible as well. So those were the tips that I had initially. And I think those are all just really, really terrific. Really terrific to go through, and I would follow all of those tips if I did that again. So let's talk a little bit here. My first tip is, if you remember in that video, there's that road walk. So there's a little bit of a road walk in the flat part by Camp Hale or just before. There's lots of good camping before that. So between the spot you see behind me here, when you leave Kokomo Pass and head down into that valley at the very bottom, there's a lot of good camping, and there's some spots by creeks and rivers, so you can get a lot of good flat camping throughout. So don't feel like you have to make it all the way there. In fact, this year by Camp Hale, a lot of people have camped there. You're not supposed to, but Camp Hale was just designated a national monument. So there's going to be a lot more attention there, and there will be a lot more people who are really, really trying to make sure that nobody is camping there near the actual Fort Hale or Camp Hale barracks and bunkers and such. So camp before that. There's not a lot of great camping past the bunkers until you get all the way to the highway. There are a couple of little spots, but for the most part, there's not a lot of good camping beyond that. So know that there's good camping just before the road walk. So if you get to the road walk, you might want to back up a little bit and find a good camping spot somewhere near there so that you can stay on flat ground to get a good night's sleep the day before. Now, let's talk here a little bit about the Copper Mountain Resort. So there is a convenience store in Copper Mountain Resort. You kind of have to walk into the village a little bit. You might need to ask some people, but the prices are pretty reasonable. So if you need anything, if you need just a top off or maybe a soda, go to that convenience store. Don't go to their restaurant unless you've got a pretty healthy wallet. Just to give you an example there, I had 2 sliders and a beer last year, and I paid $28 for that, which was before tip. It was just outrageous. I mean, genuinely outrageous. So I would recommend going to the convenience store, getting your food there, and making sure that you are saving those dollars for something better down the road, because you can get a whole pizza in Salida for that price. And so save your money on that. But the convenience store is very reasonably priced, and you can find a lot of different things there, including, I mean, you name it. If you need Band-Aids there, if you need camp fuel, they have that there. If you need any sort of hygiene products, whatever, they will have that there as well. You can also go on Airbnb and rent out rooms there. They are pricey, but you can certainly get rooms there last minute, which is good to know, but you probably have to check Airbnb to do so. You can go on their website and find some rooms occasionally, but Copper Mountain is sort of a trickier one because it's owned. A lot of the different resort facilities or condos are owned by private individuals, but they do rent them out. I stayed there before as well. And then here, you know what I did here is I made the same tip twice. So that's how much I believe in this. Consider slackpacking using the summit stage. I'll also mention here that this is a good spot if you are a segment hiker coming out to Colorado and trying to figure out a logical place to start and stop. This is a great place to stop and start, specifically because at the Copper Mountain Resort, you can get a shuttle from the Denver airport very inexpensively from a number of different services. Will run straight from the airport there to Copper Mountain. So if you think you maybe only have a week and a half to go out there, just hike to Copper and then start over there the next year. It makes it really easy by way of logistics, which can be good as well. I'd also point out here that Miller and Debbie have a great idea. Load up on at the Whole Foods in Frisco, take the bus back over to Copper. That is an absolutely stellar way to go about doing a resupply as well, because if you have some time, you can run in, you get all those different items, whatever you need. There's a lot of everything, you know, at Whole Foods, right? But there are also places in that plaza where you can pick up. There's a good coffee shop for breakfast burritos, that kind of thing. And for the price of what you would pay at the Copper Mountain Resort, you can kind of go ham over there in Frisco. So you get a bus straight over to it. The bus basically picks up right there at the resort in Copper and takes you almost right there to the Whole Foods. There's also a Walmart there if you are a Walmart shopper. There are a lot of ways you can go into Walmart and get a lot of stuff really inexpensive as well. No surprise there, it's Walmart, right? But that, my friends, is segment 8. And I think you're going to like it. I know that it's one of the ones that I really enjoy, and it's sort of just a really interesting segment. A lot of really beautiful stuff going on, a lot of good wildlife, and a lot of good water as well throughout it. Hey, guess what, everybody? We're here at segment 9. I'm very excited about segment 9. This is one of the segments that is notorious. If you've followed my channel at all, if you talk to anybody at all, talk to Mad Hippies, talk to anybody who's hiked this section, you're going to know something about segment 9, and that is really where the bugs pick up. It is the Holy Cross Wilderness. It is, I believe, the second time you go into the wilderness on the Colorado Trail. So all of the mountain bikers will be leaving the trail soon into this segment. It might be maybe 2-3 miles into the segment you get into the Holy Cross Wilderness, maybe 5 miles in. I don't remember exactly, but what we're looking at in segment 9 is about 13.6 miles, 13.5 miles. It goes up 2,600 feet and then down 3,000 feet. And there's some really interesting things about this segment, not the least of which is that you are in the you are in the Holy Cross Wilderness for a good stretch of this, and there's some good climbs in there. There's a really aggressive climb in there as well. Let's talk a little bit about my original tips here. Now, when you get to the parking lot, when you get to the end of segment 8, it will end in a parking lot, and there's sort of a monument across the highway, and your natural impulse is to walk across the highway thinking that's where the trailhead is. And I've done this multiple years. This is worse than my math skills, really. Walk right across the highway thinking that's where the trail continues as well, and it's not there. So basically what you have is you want to make sure that you don't cross the highway, and just before you, as you're walking through the parking lot, watch to the right and you'll see the trail kind of cuts over that way. It's weirdly hard to see, although it's not super hard to see if you're looking for it. You'll find it for sure, but it's easy to miss if you're staring ahead at the monument across the street, and you can spend a little time there really just kind of frustrated trying to figure out where to go. Dry camp in this segment, and in that video I also mentioned that you want to camp there in an area that is dry and ideally breezy. So basically you want to stay away from spots where mosquitoes are breeding, and that will be especially true this year with as much snow as we've seen, but any year really. It's just something about the Holy Cross Wilderness. A lot of people, as you see here from Mad Hippies, talk about it as a holy mosquito wilderness. There are some views. There's one view in particular that I talk about, the just the most incredible kind of iconic Colorado view, and we'll see that in one of the videos as well. But it is worth knowing that the mosquitoes are heavy throughout. Don't camp at Bear Lake, and Bear Lake is on your data book. You won't have any trouble finding it. There are good flat spots there, but the mosquitoes are ravenous, and there are a lot of leeches in the water. It's fine if you filter it, but it's just not as great as you'd want it to be, because you'll spend your whole time hiding from the mosquitoes in the tent. I'll point out here, we've got a couple of folks here. Girl Plus Dog Adventures points out that there are toilets there at the Tennessee Pass Trailhead. There's no cell service, but it is on a highway. So it's on US Highway 9, I believe, and that will go straight into Leadville. It's about 8 miles from the trailhead there. And so it's pretty easy to hitch into town, but it's also really easy to coordinate a shuttle from there. If you are a person who doesn't feel comfortable with hitching, you can also arrange a shuttle, but there's a good likelihood you'll find a hitch pretty quickly there, because so many people are outdoorsy in that region. And if they see you there at the trailhead, they know exactly where you're trying to go as well. And again, Ruth is sort of echoing that there are bathrooms there, and it is definitely a welcome sight at this point in the hike. It's really nice from there. So don't camp there at Bear Lake, use the porta potties. I agree. So here, if you do go into Leadville, my first tip is to go ahead and look ahead and book your Twin Lakes room and shuttle from Leadville, meaning when you get to Leadville, go ahead and book your room and possibly a shuttle while you're there in Leadville, because you're looking there at, you're at mile 139. 139, is that right? 143. Apologies, everybody. Mile 143, and then it's 30 miles down trail till Twin Lakes. And so Twin Lakes has a very, very sparse offering of hotel rooms, Airbnbs, etc. So when you get to Leadville, that's when you should look ahead if you're going to stay there. The game is a little bit different if you're going into Buena Vista for a number of different reasons. I won't mention that one here. I would not book from Leadville a room in Buena Vista because there's so many things that can complicate your travel plans in that distance. So I don't necessarily recommend that, but certainly start thinking about where you're going to stay. So it's a really tricky one if you're trying to stay in a lot of different hotel rooms along the way, but know that you can also, if you're interested in a shuttle from Twin Lakes back to Leadville, it's pretty easy to coordinate a shuttle. So get that shuttler's list, or look for Katie Katz Cash Cab. She operates out of Leadville. We've used her in the past. She will pick up people with pets or dogs on the trail too, and that's important as well. Here, take a look also at the watch your footing among the rocks. So this is a section that is particularly rocky. I probably should show you the video of that. So let me go ahead and show you the video, and I want you to pay attention to how many rocks are on the trail. So what's really interesting here is that your footing is very difficult because the trail is smooth, but there are big rocks in the way. So you have to kind of zigzag in a kind of micro level as you go through segment 9, particularly at the end of the segment. Although I will say this is just terrific hiking. I mean, it's classic Colorado hiking. It really is. So take a look here. You start off in this sort of conifer forest. Again, it's pretty hot, but there are more trees that haven't been affected by the beetle kill just yet. And there's some of these spots here that are just, I mean, this spot here is just classic, iconic Colorado, the mountain in the distance. This video doesn't do it justice. Absolutely love it. You head into the Holy Cross Wilderness, but then start looking at the rocks here and how steep it is. And you kind of have to pick your way through a lot of these. And there's some sections where, again, rocks in the way. If you find yourself kicking a lot of rocks, that's a good sign that it's time for a break or maybe to stop for the night so you don't trip and hurt yourself. That's always my sign, is when I'm stumbling on those sort of rocks or sticks, that kind of thing. This is not Bear Lake, but it's something similar, but you can kind of get a sense of how difficult the camping is in this area because of the rocks and the sort of the rockiness. It's the Rockies, right? And so that's it. That's segment 9. That's what it looks like. And then here, there is a climb. And so a couple of people have mentioned it as well, that the climb is very, very difficult through here. Ruth mentions it. So many little climbs that really drains you. And there's one big climb that kind of gets you to the crest at the beginning of it. That's very, very tough at first. So my tip here is just be patient with the climb. This is one where when you look at the data book, the segment itself is not overall very difficult, but there are a couple of spots where it gets really tough. And here's what makes the climb so hard is, and you'll know the climb that I'm talking about when you get there. It's in the Holy Cross Wilderness. You're gonna know it. What happens is it's really steep, kind of muddy, so it's a little bit slippery. Remember, there are bugs everywhere, so you kind of have to pick your poison, right? So as you're hiking, what you're going to find is you stop and the mosquitoes swarm, you keep going and you're exhausted and you're tired and it's hard and your heart will be thumping out of your chest. So you just have to be patient with it. Just know that this is coming up. It's a great time to make sure that if you have something with permethrin, if you're able to treat your clothes with permethrin, you're going to be thanking yourself here. You can also do things like tying dryer sheets to your backpack. That often, a lot of people report, works really nicely for repelling those mosquitoes. DEET works really well if you're comfortable with it. A lot of folks don't like that, but just be patient with the climb. Know that if you, if you ever heard the phrase rage quitting, this is where you would rage quit because you would be so frustrated by the bugs and the climb kind of combined. But as Ruth points out, it's not a long climb, it's a short climb. So it will take you maybe 20, 30 minutes to do it, depending on your physical ability. And then you'll be in good shape from there. So just be patient when you get to that climb. Know that it's pretty tough. But segment 9 is spectacular. It is buggy, but it is spectacular. So really try to zoom in on some of those more beautiful features. You'll get a lot more lakes in this segment than many of the other segments moving on down the trail. This is also likely where you've already established a good tramily. So this will be a really nice place for you to kind of have some good conversations on that section when you get into some flatter areas. I think you're going to like it. And then also here, noticing homeless dog adventurers sprayed her clothes and then used trekking poles like batons and just started swinging them. I mean, it really is just that. But here's the other good news about this with the buggy area. The majority of the trail is not buggy. It's not a very buggy trail, especially as you move on through the trail. So you kind of get through the Holy Cross Wilderness, and for the most part, you're not going to see a whole lot of bugs moving forward from there. You might see a few here and there, but overall, it's one section, it's 13 miles. You're going to make it through. You know, in a weird way, it'd kind of be a blessing if you got rain in that section to kind of knock down the mosquitoes out of the air and you kind of make your way through. So here's hoping that you have a great time in that segment, segment 9. I hope you love it. I think it's worth it, and it's a nice one. All right, segment 10. This one is fascinating. It is kind of like the twin brother of segment 9 with fewer bugs, more conifers, some really cool hiking. And so let's talk a little bit about this one here. Segment 10, apologies, is 13.1 miles. So it's basically the same distance, 2,700 feet up, 2,700 feet down. It is not necessarily the same in the way that the previous segment was kind of a big climb up and then like a handful of smaller bouncy kind of whatever. This one is just one where you have two big climbs, so kind of M-shaped. If you kind of follow that, you go up one, back down, up again, and back down. A lot of good hiking. It is, generally speaking, pretty smooth, and there's some really great spots where you kind of hit these areas where you're climbing or you're hiking and you're on this pine forest area that's, I mean, it's a lot of shade. The pine needles on the ground make it nice and cushy. If you have blisters at this point, this is a segment you're going to, generally speaking, you're going to really love because the trail itself is really beautiful through here. There's not a lot of stuff that's going to sort of jostle your shoes and make your feet sore. It's terrific. I really like this segment, but it's one that is in some respects kind of unremarkable, where there's not going to be one thing that you're going to think back and think sort of like, oh, Hope Pass was incredible, or oh man, that view there at Lake Ann was just dynamite. This is one where there's not a lot that you're going to think back on and think this was the one thing I remember from that segment. But it is a segment that sort of captures quite a bit of the spirit of the trail itself. Kind of think about it like it's the Missouri of the Colorado Trail, where it's certainly part of the country, but you can't really think of much about it that makes it remarkable. Now, my original tips here, this is a great time to summit Mount Massive. It's one of the 14ers. It's really worth taking that day trip, and there's good camping at the base of Mount Massive. So you can camp at the base there and then summit it and then make your way back down the trail. There is a porta potty that's not on trail, but it's only about a half mile off trail at the Mount Massive trailhead. So you'll see a lot of day hikers there. It can be a little bit frustrating if you go up later in the afternoon because they'll all be coming down. So there'll be a lot of sort of stepping off trail so they can pass. Not a big deal, but it is worth knowing, specifically if you're trying to catch a hitch back into Leadville. It's pretty easy to do so from this sort of junction of the two trailheads. So at the Mount Massive trailhead, it's not super hard to catch a hitch there back into town. Actually, at both ends of this segment, it's not hard to catch a hitch. Do an inventory of the gear in yourself. And basically what this means is take a look over everything again, reevaluate. How are you doing? How's your plan coming along? Is there anything you need to change up? Is there anything kind of bothering you? Or is there anything that you're learning about yourself that's worth kind of reflecting on? Because there are so many things you can learn about yourself and so many ways you can really enjoy the hike, but you have to be aware of those things that are giving you grief, or those things that are really starting to energize you, right? Time your visit to Twin Lakes. And so what that means is Twin Lakes is not in this segment, so it's in the next segment, but be thinking about how you're going to get into Twin Lakes or when you're going to arrive, because you don't want to show up there at a time when, if you're going to try to stay the night, you don't want to show up at 6 o'clock at night, because the rooms will all be taken and then you're going to be stuck there without any good camping in the vicinity. So just try to be mindful that, look ahead, how are you going to get into Twin Lakes? What time are you going to be there? Try to figure out that now so that you can plan your campsite the day before, because the next day is when you're likely to make your way into Twin Lakes. So that's what I mentioned the first time through. Here, my first tip is that there's great hiking and camping, medium views, meaning there are some pretty views. There's great hiking and camping. I love the trail in this segment. It is just really beautifully done, and the camping is really good throughout here. There's a lot of flat spaces, a lot of good spots, a lot of water nearby. It's just really spectacular. So know that if you're trying to finish up that last segment, segment 9, you can camp right at the end of that segment. There's a great camp spot right at the end of the segment, or the start of this segment rather. And then as you get in, there's plenty as well throughout. So be paying attention to your data book. There's a lot of really good camping. So if you didn't sleep well the night before, you will sleep well in this segment here. As I just mentioned there's good camping near the trailhead or just past it as well. And then here, I think I've went over all of these. Can you all tell that I'm getting a little sleepy here? Hitching from the massive trailhead is relatively easy because of all the day hikers, particularly in the afternoon and on the weekends. Really a lot of people coming and going. So just know that that's the case as you get in there. Let's take a look here at segment 10 as we're getting close to wrapping this one up. So here, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Look how beautiful that trail is. You're not climbing at all. You're just running along the ridge line there. A lot of really beautiful, good shade all through there. So even in the heat of the day, this one doesn't feel like it. Good water throughout. I mean, look, you're not going to get that moss in an area that's too hot or exposed. And then you'll be able to make these great miles. I just love this section specifically for trail, like the stuff you're seeing right ahead. Again, generally speaking, unremarkable. You're not going to think of this segment later on and think, man, that was the most beautiful segment. But the trail, if you pay attention to where the trail is and how nice it is, you will think back on this as being just such a classic stretch of the Colorado Trail that's really worth knowing and remembering. It's also a great section of the trail that I would encourage you, if you're in the Denver area or trying to do a shakedown hike, it's a great one to take and do a little bit of hiking in that segment to kind of check things out. You will go through the Mount Massive Wilderness area as well, which means no mountain bikes for a good stretch of that as well. So just dynamite. There is cell service in the section. When you get, there's a power line crossing. So when you get to the power line crossing, if you need cell service, that's a good spot to check it. In my experience with Verizon, I've had service there each of the different years that I've gone through there. So that one wraps up segment 10. It's a nice segment and it really lines you up. And if you're going west on the collegiates, you're just a day away from it at this point, and it is about to get bananas good. If you're going east from here, which is more common this year because of all the snow, know that you're heading into the section of the trail that I call the grind, which is a lot of sections that are similar to the Mount Massive section, only much harder by way of climbing. So the first 3 climbs in the Collegiate East are very, very difficult in my opinion. I would put them in the top 5 of the most difficult climbs on the entire trail. But then you're going to start getting into some really cool stuff toward the second half of the Collegiate East, and you'll have a pretty good in down there at Buena Vista. So there's a lot of good stuff waiting on you from here. I think you're going to love it. I'm really excited for all of you heading out soon. I want to thank you all for taking a peek there at segment 10. Let's wrap up that one. And I want to thank you all for spending a little bit of time on your Sunday night with us. And thank you to Elder Barry and Adam there, Reclaiming Ruth. It's great to see you. Mad Hippies, I'm so grateful that you all are here chiming in. I think your expertise is just so invaluable to people. And then also thank you, Tangent Trails and Unlikely Hiker. I'm grateful for all of you. I'm grateful for everybody here. So I hope you have a great night. I hope you all, if you're a father or if you have a father and a good relationship with them, I hope you got a chance to speak with them today. Take care, everybody. I'll talk with you soon. Have a great night.